Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel, and in today's video, I'm going to do a TBR of a sort, but I'm not going to do a May TBR, a TBR for the month of May. Honestly, I don't feel like I have much to say about what I'm planning to read for May, because it's kind of just sort of more of the same, of like continuing some series and the stuff that I didn't read in April that is carrying over. And so, like, I don't feel like I have a whole lot to say there that's of particular interest. But there is a new R fantasy subreddit bingo card that just came out at the beginning of April. And I think I would like to do a TBR for that. So if you're not aware, the fantasy subreddit, which is just literally r/fantasy, they do a yearly book bingo card. And it runs from April 1st to March 31st, which is kind of nice to not have one that doesn't do a calendar year. It's a little bit offset, so it's nice to do something that's a little bit more like, spring to spring as opposed to January to December. I have not done one of these before, but I would like to try it this year. So yeah. It's kind of a sort of do it the way that makes the most sense for you kind of situation. You can just sort of try to get a bingo, like across or down or diagonal, or you can try to do a blackout and do all 25 prompts over the course of the year. They do have a few rules to follow if you want to actually like submit your bingo card to get like I don't know, I think they do a special flair on the subreddit or whatever if you complete it. And I'll probably try to follow these rules for the most part, just as my own challenge. I'm not planning to submit this, but the main rules are just one book per bingo square, so you can't use one book for more than one of the prompts, essentially. So there's that. You also cannot repeat an author, so each individual square also has to be a different author, so there will be no repeat authors. And also, I think the only other rule is that you're allowed only one reread if you're doing sort of normal mode, and if you want to do a hard mode, then 0 rereads for the entire bingo card. And it's a 25 prompt bingo card, so it's a 5x5. I'll probably put an image of it like up here somewhere so you can see as I'm going along. So I'll try to follow those rules. Each prompt has a sort of normal mode, basic version, and then there's a quote-unquote hard mode version, which is at least theoretically, a slightly trickier version of the same prompt. And so you can pick which one you want to do, if you want to do the hard mode version or if you just want to do the normal mode. Most of these, I tried to find a hard mode, a title that would work for the hard mode version, but a couple of them I'm not bothering with the hard mode one, and I'll let you know which ones those are. But most of these I tried to find at least one title that would fit the hard mode if I feel like it. But and there's also what they call a hero mode version, which is just you review every book that you read on this, which I'll probably be able to manage pretty easily, because not only do I make these little video reviews of books, but I also, every time I finish a book on Storygraph, I have, at least this year, I've been trying to actually like write a few, even just a few sentences to actually review the book as opposed to just giving it like a star rating. I try to actually write something for the book. So, and I've been doing a really good job of that so far, so I feel like I should be able to do hero mode without any difficulty. Many of these I should be able to do hard mode for, but probably not all of them. I am going to try to do all of the prompts, but again, I'm not terribly worried about it. For me, reading challenges, when I do reading challenges like this is more about I don't worry too much about completing all of the prompts in the time period given necessarily. For me, this is just more like a way to sort of narrow down my TBR, because I'm the kind of person that every so often I find myself a little bit overwhelmed by choice, and that can lead to a certain amount of choice paralysis of like just there's so many things to choose from that I don't know what to pick, and therefore I just don't pick anything, and then that leads to me not reading for a while. And I don't want to do that. So for me, having these slightly more contained lists of TBRs that are sort of pulled from my larger TBR helps me narrow down my decision making, right? It helps me make those decisions without becoming paralyzed by choice. So I try to list like at least a couple of potential titles for each of the prompts, because I feel like it, because I'm a mood reader, because things will probably change over the course of the year. Though some of them I have more trouble figuring out things to do for them than others. You'll see when I get to them. And if you have any recommendations for any of these prompts, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I will take any recommendations you have. And they don't have to be hard mode. They don't have to be hard mode. Like I said, I tried to find at least one hard mode title for each one, but if it's not hard mode, but it still fits the general prompt, that's fine. I'll look at it, definitely, because I'm always looking to add stuff. But yeah, so it's like my Storygraph, my to read pile on Storygraph has like almost 500 titles on it. They're not all fiction. They don't all fit within the sort of speculative umbrella, but it's a lot. There's a lot. So this is just a way for me to sort of narrow down. So almost all the titles here I've pulled directly from my Storygraph to read pile. These titles are on my to read pile. Also, I will probably recommend some that I've already read that would work for these prompts, at least for some of them. Some of them I might not necessarily have recommendations for, but I'll try. I have written down a few titles for some of them. So, all that having been said, let's talk about what books I have sort of been thinking about for some of these prompts. The first one, admittedly, this one is like, this is going to get done no matter what. Like, there will be a book that I could use for this prompt no matter what at some point in the next year, because this is fantasy, right? This is speculative fiction. Oh, and by the way, just because the subreddit is fantasy, not all of the titles have to be fantasy. As long as it falls under speculative fiction, it works for this bingo card. So it's fantasy, sci-fi, dystopian, post-apocalyptic, supernatural horror, anything that falls under spec fic works for this bingo card. So anyway, so the first prompt is the first in a series, the first book of a series. And again, this is one that's like really broad, really easy. If you're in spec fic, if you read any spec fic at all, you're probably reading some series. The hard mode version of this is a little bit harder, but it's still pretty easily doable, which is to read the first book in a series that has more than 3 books in it, right? So at least 4 books in it makes it hard mode. So not a trilogy, basically. So I have several options for this. I have a lot of options for this if I don't do hard mode. If I don't do hard mode, I have like literally at least 3 or 4 books just sitting on my to be read pile physically here that I could do. Like The Hexologists by Josiah Bancroft. I'm pretty sure this is the first in a series. I have Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Weir. This is definitely the first in the series. I have Godkiller by Hannah Kaner. This is the first in the series. Like, these are all just sitting here in my physical TBR. Though most of these are like trilogies or duologies or whatever, and they're not longer series. But I do have a few hard mode possibilities as well. The Grace of Kings by Ken Lewes is the first in the Dandelion Dynasty series. This is a 4-book series, so it's not too bad. My issue with the hard mode on this one is simply that I'm already reading a lot of series that have a lot more than 3 books in them. And so I'm a little bit reluctant to start another super long series, because I've just recently started The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. I'm 2 books into that one. I've started the Murderbot Diaries. I'm 2 books into that one. I'm in the middle of Discworld. I'm like 4 books into Discworld. The History of Middle Earth. I'm like halfway through History of Middle Earth. That's 12. So like, but The Grace of Kings is probably fine. It's 4 books. I did start to read this a while back, several years ago, when I was still kind of burned out and still a little bit wishy-washy about reading bigger, denser things. So I didn't finish it, but I'd like to go back to it, because I think now I'm in a much better place where I can actually sit down and read the denser, chunkier things. And the Dandelion Dynasty is definitely one of those that's thick and big. It could also fit several other prompts. Most of these books could probably fit several prompts on this bingo card, which is part of why I'm trying to list like more than one title for each prompt, just so that I can mix and match things as I go. But yeah, Grace of Kings is definitely one option. I could also try Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. That's the first in the Expanse series. Again, all these are books that I intend to read. They're in my to-read pile. So these are just possibilities. So yeah, the Expanse series is definitely one that I want to give a shot at some point, and it's definitely longer than 3 books. Also, The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nhi Vo. This is one that appeals to me in part because not only is it hard mode, because there's more than 3 books in the series, but they're also short. They're novellas. And like, you do want to minimize, like the rules in the fantasy subreddit are, you want to kind of minimize the number of novellas and like manga and graphic novels that you read. But if I was going to start another series, it might as well be a novella series as opposed to like a big thick chunker one. So Rex, I have any recommendations? I mean, again, first in series, God, there's so many. Like, just pick one, right? Pick one. But Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett is the first in the Discworld series. If you've never read Discworld, I highly recommend you read some Discworld. And The Color of Magic is a good book. It's fun. Might as well try it. Or a more recent one that I've read, Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. If you haven't read Realm of the Elderlings, I'm starting to read it. You should read it. It's good. There's lots of them. There's a bazillion series out there. Find one that appeals to you and start it. The second prompt is an alliterative title. There are lots of alliterative titles to choose from here. The hard mode does get pretty tricky, though, because the hard mode version of this is that there has to be at least 3 alliterative words in the title, which is actually pretty tricky. There's a lot of alliterative titles, but most of them only have 2 alliterative words. But I did find 2 titles on my to-read pile that work for this. First is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is another one, like with The Grace of Kings, where I started reading it a while back. I was kind of in a reading slump. It was a little bit too much for me at the point that I was at. And so I ended up sort of DNFing it and not getting very far into it. But I want to try it again, and I've heard lots of good things about it, and this would fit for this prompt. Also, When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. That also fits for the hard mode prompt, and also seems really fun and interesting. It's sort of an alternative history where a bunch of women in the 1950s suddenly turn into dragons. It sounds amazing. That sounds like that premise alone is like, I'm like, I don't need to hear anymore. I kind of want to read this. So I'll give those a shot. But like, there's lots of possibilities that are not hard mode. The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence is one that I think of off the top of my head. Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong is another one off the top of my head. These are all books that like I know about, I want to read them, and they would work for non-hard mode. I do have a recommendation that fits the hard mode of this, and that is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. If you haven't read that one, this is a good opportunity to do that. It's a very, very good book. Highly recommend it. The next prompt is Under the Surface. So this is specifically books that have at least a portion of them that take place either underwater or underground. And the hard mode version of this is that more than half of the book takes place underwater or underground. And this one I do really only have one title that I'm like, this is it. This is the one I'm going to read. And that is Wool by Hugh Howey. This is the first in the Silo trilogy, which is a sort of post-apocalyptic situation where most of humanity has retreated to these large underground silos. And so the entire, as far as I know, the entire book pretty much takes place in this underground silo. So it counts for hard mode. I watched the television show Silo that is based on these books on Apple. It was really good. I really liked it. I want to read the books. So Wool is what I'm probably going to read for this. I have a couple recs for this prompt. A hard mode rec is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. It's a really good book. A lot of it takes place in underneath London, in a kind of dark fantasy underground London. And a non-hard mode recommendation for this category would be The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. It also works as a non-hard mode recommendation for the alliterative title prompt. It's also very good, and a chunk of it, not half of it. I don't think it's a hard mode because I think it's less than half, but a chunk of it does take place in, again, a kind of underground area. The next prompt is criminals. So this is any book where a main character protagonist is some kind of criminal. A thief, a con artist, an assassin, anything. The hard mode version of this is that the book features a heist. I actually really like heist books, so I want to read a heist book. The obvious title to go for would be Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I've not read Six of Crows. I've read one Leigh Bardugo book a very long time ago. I read Shadow and Bone, like when it was first published. Frankly, it was like a brand new book when I read it. I didn't like it all that much. I thought it was a little twee and a little bit too YA-ish for me at the time. I haven't tried rereading it. It's possible my tastes have changed and I would like it better now. I don't know. But I've heard really good things about Six of Crows. And while Six of Crows is still YA, I feel like it might be a little bit more my speed than Shadow and Bone. So I might try it. If I do DNF it, though, I do have another possibility, which is Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. Both of these, I'm told, feature heists. If you want a recommendation for a heist book, I highly recommend the Rogues of the Republic trilogy by Patrick Weeks. The first book in this trilogy is called The Palace Job. It's very fun. It's very funny, and it features it's the classic sort of ragtag group of characters who are doing a heist. And it's super funny. Patrick Weeks, they have a great sense of humor. They're really sharp, funny prose. It's a thoroughly enjoyable trilogy of books, and I'm pretty sure all three of them feature heists, but The Palace Job definitely features a heist. So that's that for that one. Hey, so this is Chantel from the future. I realized as I was going back through this video that I actually completely skipped over one of the prompts. So I'm going to do it now and insert it into the video. The fifth prompt is on this bingo card is dreams. And the easy mode for this is just any speculative fiction book that has any kind of dreams in it, whether they be mystical, magical, prophetic, or not. But the hard mode version of this is that the dreams have to be completely mundane and not magical, mystical, or prophetic in any way, which I think is kind of tricky, not because there aren't a lot of books that have mundane dreams in them. It's actually, I would say, probably a pretty common thing to have it happen. particularly in certain like subgenres of like fantasy and sci-fi. But of course, it's hard to clock it. um, it's hard to clock it. Like I like trying to like if even just trying to me trying to think of like books that have characters who have like just regular dreams or nightmares in them. Like I know I've read a lot of them that do that, but can I think of any actual titles off the top of my head? Absolutely not. I was actually thinking about this though, and I realized that a book that I just recently finished reading, Paladin's Hope by T. Kingfisher, actually does feature one of the main protagonists actually has PTSD induced nightmares, and there is a section in that book where he has a nightmare. And they're totally mundane, they're not magical at all. So if I don't find any other titles that work for this prompt, I suppose I could use that one. But if you have any suggestions for this prompt, by all means, let me know what they are. Either hard mode or non-hard mode, frankly, because I really like stories that have like particular like prophetic dreams, or dreams that are like visions, or dreams that like tell you things about the characters. I'm really into that kind of thing. So if you have anything that has that has really good prophetic dream representation or mystical dream representation, I'll always take recommendations for those as well. So yeah, hard mode or non-hard mode. Feel free to recommend titles, because yeah, I'm kind of at a loss for this particular category. And maybe that's why my brain decided to just kind of skip right over it in the original video. Anyway, I'll return you back to past Chantel and the rest of the bingo card. Thanks. And then we have Entitled Animals, which is literally just an animal in the title. The book doesn't have to feature animals in the book. As long as there's an animal in the title, it counts for this prompt. The hard mode version of this prompt is that the animal in question is some kind of fictional, mythical, mystical animal. So a phoenix, a dragon, a griffin, whatever. So the hard mode is actually pretty easy for this one, because like there's tons of books that are dragon, right? That have dragon in the title. That have the word dragon in the title. The one I will probably try to read for this is A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. I know this is the first in a series, and I've heard good things about it. It sounds really fun, but there's a bunch of possibilities, frankly. If you want a non-hard mode recommendation for this, off the top of my head, The Raven Tower by Anne Leckie is really good. It's a dark fantasy with lots of gods and politics and stuff like that. It's really good. The next prompt is bards. So any book that features as a main character a bard, a minstrel, a musician, a poet, a storyteller, something like that. The hard mode version is that the main character is actually called a bard in the context of the book, which is a pretty narrow and tough one. This is definitely one where, like, if you have recommendations for me, either for hard mode or non-hard mode, honestly, I don't care. I'm not too worried about, like, making sure that the character's actually called a bard. I did find one, I believe, some folks on the Reddit were saying that A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross counts as hard mode for this. So if that's true, then I'll probably give that a shot, because it's definitely in my to-read pile. But if you have other recommendations, either hard mode or non-hard mode, by all means, give them to me. I also do have a recommendation that is hard mode, which is the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. If you're not familiar with the Witcher series, it's a dark fantasy series. But yeah, one of the main characters, Dandelion, or in the Netflix show, they call him Jaskier. He is a bard, and he's called a bard, and he's known as a bard. But yeah, this is definitely one where if you've got other recs for me, let me know in the comments, because I don't think I've read a lot of books that feature like musicians, poets, storytellers, whatever, which is weird. But yeah, I'd love to read more. I'd love to have some more recommendations for it. The next prompt is prologues and epilogues. The normal mode for this is just one or the other. The hard mode for this is a book that has both. I'm told that The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi has both, and I have this book. I own it, so I might try this one. I've also been told that The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri has both, and that's been on my to-read list for quite a while, so either of those would work. You know, I'm not sure that I have any immediate recommendations for it, like off the top of my head, of books that I have read that have both prologues and epilogues. I know I have read probably many books that have both. I'm not sure if I can think of any at the top of my head. Again, prologues and epilogues, this is a fantasy, sci-fi, speculative fiction kind of thing. A lot of books have one or the other or both. It's not going to be difficult to find one to fill this particular box on the bingo card, so whatever, you know. The next one is probably the hardest one on this bingo card for me, which is the self-published or indie published prompt. The hard mode on this is like, if it's self-published, it must have fewer than 100 ratings on Goodreads at the time you read it. Or if it's an indie publisher, it's one that they've done an AMA on Reddit for. I don't like that. This is one that like I'm not going to worry about the hard mode at all for, frankly, because I just don't read a lot of indie pubs or a lot of self pubs. I was looking at the recommendations list on the fantasy subreddit, and I did like jot down a few names of authors that got mentioned like a couple of times in the recommendations of people that seem to like them. But I'm kind of lost. So one that I found that is titled Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan, that seems to get mentioned sometimes. So maybe that I might try to check that out. Also, this is going to depend on like what is even available to me where I am, like in my library, or if I can find something for cheap on my Kindle or whatever. Isabel Pellick, I think, is another name that got tossed around a lot. Victoria Goddard is one that got tossed around a few times, or Jack D. Hawkins. I'm gonna have to do some research and see what they've written, what kinds of things they've written, what looks good. Because yeah, I just don't like, it's just not something that I seek out usually very often. So if you have recommendations, by all means, leave them in the comments. If you've got any like fave indie, even especially like indie publishing houses, like small indie publishing houses, if you have any of those and you have some titles from them that you like, let me know in the comments, because I do want to know more about, especially about indie publishers. I would love to read more stuff from indie publishers. So by all means, leave recommendations in the comments, because I'm kind of at a loss for this prompt, frankly. The next prompt, ironically, is probably the easiest one on this bingo board for me to do, and that is the romantasy prompt. And even more ironically, the hard mode version of this prompt is probably easier for me than the easy mode version, because the hard mode version of the romantasy prompt is a queer romance. And I read a lot of queer romance, so like, I've already filled this spot on the bingo card, actually, because I just finished reading Paladin's Hope by T. Kingfisher. This is the third in the Saint of Steel series, and it is a gay romance. It was really good. I liked it a lot. So these are all sort of both like books that I am reading and also books that I would recommend. I'm also nearly finished with A Power Unbound by Freya Marski. This is the third and final book in the Last Binding trilogy, and this entire trilogy is all gay romantasy. And it's very good. It's extremely good. So that's also a recommendation from me. I will very soon be reading Soulstar by C.L. Polk. This is of the final book in the Kingston Cycle trilogy, which is also a trilogy of gay romantasy, and is also very good, and I highly recommend. I would also recommend The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I'm going to be reading soon the sequel, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. Again, it's another sort of cute, cozy, it's cute, cozy, gay romance fantasy. And I'm also thinking about maybe trying the Green Creek Saga, also by T.J. Klune, the first book of which is called Wolfsong. I'm kind of iffy about it, but I've heard some good things. I've heard some mixed things, so we'll see. I will say on the romantasy side of things, the Saint of Steel series has some explicit sex scenes in it, as does the Last Binding trilogy. The Kingston Cycle trilogy and the House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune do not have explicit sex scenes. So when I talk about romance books, I tend to want to specify whether it has explicit sex or not, because, you know, some people prefer one or the other. Personally, I don't necessarily have a preference. I like all of it. It doesn't have it, you know, I'm good either way. Though depending on my mood, I might be more in the mood for one or the other at any given time. So I tend to I tend to like to know if it's going to have explicit sex scenes or not, just to make sure I'm in the right mood for what I'm reading. So anyway, the next prompt is dark academia, and they define this on the subreddit pretty broadly. So there's quite a bit that could fit in here. The hard mode version, though, is that the school featured in the dark academia it needs to be mundane or non-magical or somehow situated in the real world. That's the hard mode version. Again, you know, I may or may not do the hard mode version, but I did pick a couple of titles that would fit with the hard mode. Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Again, if I read Six of Crows, then I won't read Ninth House for this one, or vice versa. But I also do have The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. This is set in The Cloisters, which is a real annex. It's an annex of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. So it's a real place. And so this, I think, would work because I'm pretty sure this has some sort of magical or supernatural element to it. So I think this would work for that as well. There's also like the Scholomance trilogy, which, you know, wouldn't work for hard mode, but it would fit. It does fit the dark academia thing. As far as recommendations go, Babel by R.F. Kuang, of course, wouldn't fit hard mode, but it is kind of the example of the dark academia book, and it's very good. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. One that might fit with hard mode is kind of a little borderline, is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This is more of a romantasy type series, and honestly the other books in the series sort of get away from the dark academia thing, but the main character is a scholar. She's a historian, as well as a witch, and she is she's like a professor at Oxford. And so the first book at least is set at least partially in Oxford, in and around Oxford, and the Bodleian Library in Oxford. So I would think that would count, probably. The next prompt is multi-POV. This is a fun one, actually. I don't read a ton of multi-POV stuff, but I do have a number of them sort of on my to-read pile. So, yeah. Jade City by Fonda Lee, I believe. Oh, and the hard mode version of this is that it has at least 5 separate POVs. So multi-POV is anything that has 3 or more POVs, but the hard mode version of is at least 5. So I'm pretty sure, I'm told that Jade City fits the hard mode version of this. Also, Malice by John Gwynne, and I think John Gwynne's other trilogy or series that he's currently writing also fits the hard mode prompt of this, I think. Again, I'm not entirely sure because I haven't read them, but I'm told. Also, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. Again, I've never read John Gwynne. I've never read Joe Abercrombie. They're on my to-read list. So maybe I'll try one of them, or I might just read Jade City by Fonda Lee, which is another one that's, and I own it. It's somewhere in this pile of books next to me. I actually own Jade City, so I might read that. I don't know. My only recommendation for this would be A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. If you've not read A Game of Thrones, I honestly highly recommend it. It's really good. I know a lot of people don't like the fact that it's an unfinished series and, like, it probably won't ever be finished at this rate, which is fair. I tend to feel that way too, but also, like, it's really good. The characters are really great. I think it is definitely worth your time, despite the fact that it's probably never going to be finished. Anyway, the next prompt is published in 2024. And the hard mode version of this is that it's a debut. I've actually already read at least one debut that was published in 2024, but it won't work for the bingo card because I read it before April. And that is The City of Stardust by Georgia Summers. So if you're looking for a recommendation for that, there you go. That was a fun book. I enjoyed it. Some other options for me would be The Honey Witch by Sydney S. Shields. These are all hard mode, by the way. Or Fathom Folk by Eliza Chan. A non-hard mode is another Leigh Bardugo book. I don't know why this list is full of Leigh Bardugo books, but The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo just came out. I have a hold on it from my library. It doesn't fit hard mode, but it fits the prompt, which is published in 2024. And it's historical fantasy. It's super right up my alley. This is the Leigh Bardugo that I'm, like, most looking forward to reading and absolutely am going to read immediately when my hold comes in. Hopefully it'll be in sometime in May. So if nothing else works for this and I don't read any other Leigh Bardugo for this bingo card, then that'll probably work. The next prompt for this is a book with a character who has a disability. This could be physical or mental disability. The hard mode is that it's a main character. A couple of hard mode titles for this. I'm told that the main character of Godkiller by Hannah Kaner has a prosthetic leg, I think. So that would work. Also, The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, I believe, has a main character who is disabled. So those would work. I don't know. If you have any other recommendations for main characters with disabilities, leave them in the comments below, because I'm more than happy to read more than one book that would fit this category. All of these categories, I'll probably read more than one book that fits the category, because, again, all of these are titles that I want to read. So yeah, if you have any interesting recs for me for this one, leave them in the comments. A recommendation that I have is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, sitting right here. One of the main characters is blind, if I recall correctly. So it's a good book. Read it. The next one is a book that was published in the 1990s. The hard mode version of this is the author of that book is still publishing, like, within the last 5 years. There's a few authors on here that I might be willing to give a shot. Guy Gabriel Kay is one of them. I have a lot of his books on my read pile. Martha Wells is another one. Garth Nix. All of these are hard mode authors. They're all still publishing today, and they have been publishing since the 90s. If you have any other recommendations for authors who fit hard mode, or who don't, frankly, leave them in the comments, because I haven't actually read a ton of stuff that's been published in the 90s. I've read, like, A Song of Ice and Fire, the first few of the, like, A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings, I think, were both published in the 90s. I've read a little Mercedes Lackey. I am currently reading, of course, Robin Hobb, the first few of which of her books were published in the 90s. And I think technically she counts as hard mode too, so that would work. Neil Gaiman. I'm not sure if Neil Gaiman, in terms of recommendations, I'm not sure if Neil Gaiman counts for hard mode, because I would actually have to, like, do some math and see, like, when was the last book he actually published. Was it within 5 years? But I mean, he's still kicking, he's still around, he's still writing stuff, so probably. Terry Pratchett, unfortunately, does not count for hard mode. He's passed away now, but I mean, he wrote a number of his Discworld books were published in the 90s. So yeah, the Sandman comics by Neil Gaiman, Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, several of the Discworld novels. Check the publication date. There's a lot of good stuff. But yeah, if you have any other recommendations for authors who were publishing in the 90s, let me know in the comments below. Because again, I wasn't really reading much fantasy in the 90s, so I'd like to read some more of that slightly older fantasy that's more classic at this point. The next prompt is orcs, trolls, and goblins. Oh my. So any book featuring orcs, trolls, and or goblins, the hard mode is the orc, troll, and or goblin is a main character. The obvious one for me to read for this would be Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. It's the prequel to Legends and Lattes. I read Legends and Lattes in January. I haven't read Bookshops and Bone Dust yet. The main character is an orc, I think. But if you have any other titles that you think would be good, that would fit, especially that would fit hard mode, because I'd really like to actually get the hard mode on this one and do a main character, then by all means leave them in the comments, because I want to know, because I haven't read many books with a main character like this. The only book that I can say that I've read, apart from Legends and Lattes, of course, is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. The Goblin Emperor is so good. If you have not read The Goblin Emperor and you're doing this bingo card, do this. Read it. It is so good. I promise you, you will not regret it. It's very good. It's very political. The world building is detailed and intricate. The character arcs are insanely good. Yeah, it's so good. I love that book. The next prompt is space opera. Another broad one. I like a space opera. Though I haven't read a ton. The hard mode version of this is that they're a gender minority. So they're either, the author is either a woman, or they're trans, or they're non-binary, or they're some other gender minority. This is not difficult for me. I'll almost certainly be reading a Desolation called Peace by Arcady Martin. That fits hard mode for this. I've already read, it's the sequel to, can't remember the name. I'll put it up. The actual title. A Memory Called Empire, I'm pretty sure. A Memory Called Empire. Took me a minute. But yeah, A Memory Called Empire is a great space opera. So I'll definitely be reading a Desolation Called Peace pretty soon, because it's the sequel to that. I'll also probably be doing a reread / read of the Imperial Radka trilogy by Anne Leckie, starting with Ancillary Justice. I've read like the first 2 books in that trilogy. I hadn't read the third one yet, so I'll reread the first 2 and then read the third one. And then Translation State is like another book set in that universe, I think, but it's like a spin-off. So I want to go back to that universe, because that's a great space opera too. Yeah. If you have any other good space operas, especially written by women, trans people, non-binary people, leave them in the comments. As like, again, with any of these categories, if you have any recommendations, leave them in the comments. I'm always looking for recommendations. The next category is another really broad one, and it's an author of color. That's so easy for me because I read a lot of non-white authors. Frankly, I would get bored really fast if I was only reading white authors. So I read a lot of authors that are not white. So the hard mode of this, I'm definitely going to try to do. And it's a debut novel that was published within the last 5 years. So I'll probably be reading To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Blackgoose. This is a debut from, I think, just like within the last year. Sorry about that. I keep getting interrupted by things. So anyway, I'll probably be reading To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Blackgoose. But I could also read She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. That's on my to-read list. Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel is another one that's on my to-read list. I read a lot of non-white authors. This is not going to be a difficult one for me to fill. If you're looking for recommendations, like there's a ton. N.K. Jemisin, Shannon Chakraborty, Niveau. I read The Chosen and the Beautiful by Niveau. I loved that book. P. Jelly Clark, Rebecca Kwong, Rebecca Roanhorse. There's a lot of authors. I read a lot of authors that are not white. So like, yeah, there's a lot of good ones out there. They're not hard to find. It shouldn't take much to find a good one for this prompt. The next prompt is survival. So any book that features a strong survival element to it. The hard mode on this one is, I don't think, particularly hard. And that is simply to read a survival book that is not about a pandemic or a super virus or a disease of some kind, which I think should not be difficult. The main one that I probably will read is Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Ejene Brenya. Yeah, it seems like it's like a very, from what I understand, it's a very sort of gladiatorial spec fic, super dark, super heavy on the survival elements. Another one that might work for this would be Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I'm told that it's a little bit Hunger Games-y, with sort of competitions and fighting for survival. Another one that would work for this would be the Naomi Novik Scholomance trilogy, beginning with A Deadly Education, which is literally a killer school that the students have to survive. I'm not sure if I have any strong recommendations off the top of my head. I don't read a ton of like survival fiction. That's not one that I seek out a lot, so I'm not sure I would have any strong recommendations for you. But if you have any others that you really like, leave them in the comments. The next prompt is judge a book by its cover, which is pretty much what it says on the tin, is to read a book that you think has a nice, pretty, or cool cover. The hard mode of this version is to only read a book based on its cover, not even to read the blurb or anything about it, to just literally just pick it up entirely based on the cover. So I don't have any titles that I've picked for this, and I'm not going to recommend anything either, because I think this is definitely one where it's like, at some point, I'm just going to go to the library or go to my local bookshop and pick the book that has the prettiest cover and just see what I get. So that's that one. The next prompt is set in a small town. I feel like there's like two main sort of ways this could go. One of them is like cozy fantasy, and the other is basically some like small town horror. So I have some from each of those subgenres on this list. The hard mode of this is that while the town itself can be fictional, it must be set in the real world rather than in a secondary world. So I'll probably try to do the hard mode, because I don't think that should be difficult. The Woods All Black by Lee Mandello is one that I've been looking at and interested in for a while. The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Kist is another one. So these are more on the sort of darker horror-y side of things. And then there's The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling, which I think is more of a cozy, sort of cutesy, romantic type cozy fantasy thing. For recommendations on this sort of more cozy fantasy thing, Emily Wilde books by Heather Fawcett are quite good, and they're generally set in sort of remote, rural, small town, village type places, but it is in our ostensibly our world. It's historical fantasy, so it's set ostensibly in our world. So that works for hard mode. Also, another one that works for hard mode is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a horror novel that's set in rural Mexico, and it's really good. I don't want to say too much about it, but yeah, it's big creepy house, big creepy family, old creepy family, with secrets. It's good. So the next prompt is 5 short stories. So again, it's just 5 short stories that fall in the speculative fiction umbrella. The hard mode of this is to read an entire collection or anthology of short stories, which that's doable. That's what I'll do. I'm going to pick up a book of short stories and I'm going to read it, all of it. cover to cover. So I have a few options here. I know Shannon Chakraborty wrote, has a collection of short stories set in the Daevabad universe. I think it's called The River of Silver. So that's a strong possibility. If I can pick that up, I definitely will. There's a couple other options of short story collections that I think sound interesting, including Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Marita Machado. I've heard really good things about this. Another one is How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. It's another N.K. Jemisin that I haven't read yet, and I really like N.K. Jemisin, so that would be a no-brainer as well. The next prompt is Eldritch Creatures. So gods, monsters, creatures from another plane of existence, whatever. The hard mode version of this is that the creatures in question should not be based on the Cthulhu mythos, aka they're not Lovecraft. They should be specifically not Lovecraftian monsters, which I think is pretty doable, actually. What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher is one that's been on my to-read pile for a while. I like T. Kingfisher. I want to get more into some of her horror stuff. What Moves the Dead, yeah, that it sounds like that would work for that. Also, I've been told that the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams would also fit this bill, and that's also in my to-read pile. As for recommendations, I mean, again, another N.K. Jemisin. This is not hard mode because the creatures in this book are specifically Lovecraftian, but The City We Became and its sequel, The World We Make, is a really good fit for this prompt if you're, if you're not doing hard mode. The next prompt is reference materials, so that's maps, glossaries, character lists, pronunciation guides, whatever. Anything that has reference materials in it. Again, this is another one that's pretty basic for spec fic and especially for fantasy. If you read a lot of fantasy, like, this is probably going to be taken care of just in the course of my regular reading, because I read a lot of fantasy, and a lot of fantasy has reference materials in it. But the hard mode of this is that it has at least 2 or more of these reference materials. So again, that means footnotes, that means glossaries, that means maps, that means diagrams, that means pronunciation guides, that means timelines, etc., etc. So I have a few of these that I've been told fit hard mode for this. Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wong is one. The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett is another. Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick is also another one. All of these are on my to-read list, and I've been told that all of them fit this prompt on hard mode. As far as recommendations go, again, like, I don't know that I need to even really say this, because so many fantasy books have reference materials in them. But I mean, The Lord of the Rings has a bunch, and that would work for hard mode. Lord of the Rings would absolutely work for hard mode. It's got a lot of reference materials. The Silmarillion, anything by Tolkien is gonna have a lot of reference material. So, if you haven't read any Tolkien, that's a good prompt for it. And the final prompt for this bingo card is a book club or read-along book, specifically one of the book clubs or read-alongs that, like, the fantasy subreddit uses. And they have an entire, like, Google spreadsheet that lists all of the ones that they have done in the past, and any of them would count for this prompt, so it should not be difficult for me to find a title that is on that list that is also on my to-read pile that would work for this prompt. The hard mode of this I'm not going to worry about, because the hard mode of this is to do one that they're currently doing and actually participate in the discussion of it, to actually do, like, participate in the book club or read along. And I'm probably not going to do that, because I'm really bad at participation, frankly. Participation is always the thing that I was really bad at in school, so I'll probably just pick one from the Google spreadsheet. So yeah, that is the 2024 Reddit Fantasy Bingo card, and my pile of possibilities and some recommendations for other people for some of them. Yeah, as again, like, if you have any recommendations or anything that you're thinking about doing for them for these prompts, leave a comment. Again, I'm actively soliciting your recommendations for some of these prompts, especially, again, the indie publishers. If you have any indie publishers that you really like, please, please, please leave a comment and tell me. Otherwise, yeah, as always, just, like the video. If you want to subscribe, that would be great. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.